Hey, Stewart's Chapel, Don Pierson here, and Don Counts. And this is December the 30th, Thursday, December the 30th. And we're continuing our study in the presence of predators with a series within that series, Little Predators Take Life Too. And we've been looking at Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 15, where it tells us to catch the little foxes that destroy the vine. I told you yesterday that we'll be looking at, I don't even know, let's see, there's 14 there. Is there more on the other side? No, 14 little foxes, little things that destroy or damage the vine or growth. I'll just go ahead and read them all to you. A little stealing, a little temper, a little lying, a little wandering eyes, a little unforgiveness, a little rest, a little folly, a little faith, a little love, a little leaven, a little tongue, a little gratitude, a little bitterness, and a little commitment. Today we're going to focus in on a little stealing. Now, recognize there's nothing little about any of these, but in our minds, we have a tendency to rationalize sin. And we have a tendency to see it smaller than what it is. And so when I use a little stealing, I'm not belittling it at all. In fact, I'm doing the opposite. I'm being facetious and letting you know that these are big deals. These are big deals. The passage today is in Ephesians, and actually, a couple of Sundays ago in my Sunday school class, we talked about this verse. It's in Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 28, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let him who stole steal no longer. I thought that was kind of funny, don't you think? That God would write to a bunch of Christians and say, hey, you who used to steal shouldn't steal anymore. In other words, that should stop. It's funny sometimes that God has to tell us what we shouldn't be doing when we're doing it. But I think it's good for us to understand the context here. The letter to the Ephesians was to a group of Gentile believers. They didn't have the 10 Commandments to operate by. They grew up in a heathen world, and where stealing was just common. And some of these people would have been very, very poor, and stealing would have been a means of their survival. One of the things that I noticed as I traveled into various parts of the world, that in third world countries, that you find individuals that literally grow up being thieves. There was a individual in my life that he grew up on the street, basically had no parental presence in his life, and he survived by stealing. And so the context here, this is how these individuals lived, and God is writing to them and telling them, God's telling them, and says, that's not who you are anymore. That was of the old nature. You shouldn't do that anymore. That's not how a follower of Christ lives. A follower of Christ is not, here, get this, is not about getting. A follower of Christ is about giving. And so when a believer is taking or stealing from others, they're not reflecting the Christ nature, because the Christ nature is one that of sacrifice, of surrender, of giving. But a little stealing, any kind of stealing, is evil and wrong. Stealing is based in the sin of envy, covetousness. Part of our training as missionaries before we ever left the United States, and it was a large group of people going all over the world, and several times they stressed the fact that many of the places we were going to were third world countries where there wasn't a lot of excess. In other words, some of them, the clothes you saw were the only clothes they had. certainly they wouldn't have 2 pairs of shoes. They wouldn't have 2 of anything. And they shared story after story. These long-term missionaries shared stories after stories about warning about, for example, what you put on your clothesline. Don't put 2 of anything. Because the mentality was, evidently, you have an abundance. So if I take one, you're still going to be okay. Because, by the way, most of the world really only does have one, and most of the world doesn't even have that when it comes to shoes. And so we live in a world of abundance, of excess, and we don't even think about it. And we have a tendency to condemn stealing in those countries when we go as tourists because we have so abundance. But we do not realize the image we present in that world. You're saying, well, we're not rich, but yeah, but we present that image to them. And so in many of their cultures, taking one is not considered a wrong thing. I remember I left my shoes on my porch one time alongside another pair of shoes. So there was 2 pairs of my shoes out there. One morning I went out to get my shoes and 1 pair was gone. Somebody took 1 pair of shoe. And I knew immediately. I remember the story of part of my training. They saw 2 pairs, so they figured, well, he can do without 1. Well, it wasn't long later, about a week or week and a half later, those shoes were back on my porch when I went out there with a little note saying, not my size. And I thought that was funny that they brought it back because they didn't need it. It wasn't their size and it didn't do them any good, but the only reason they took it was because I had an abundance. Well, let me tell you something. Stealing's wrong. Now, you and I may be quick to condemn people in those kind of cultures, third world cultures, for their stealing. Well, let me tell you something. I have found that Christians in America are many, not all, are thieves and don't even know it, don't even realize it. We rob our employers of our very best. We only give them average. We don't give them more. We rob them of our time. We take longer breaks, longer lunch. We don't give them our full. People have a tendency in the American Christians are always robbing from their spouse. They'll covenant another woman or another man and leave their wife or their husband for that, and they will rob another person in order to do that, and at the same time rob their spouse. We rob our kids. We rob our kids from the understanding of what it means to work hard and have a good work ethic, because we give them everything. And we give them everything because we don't want them to do like us. Well, that isn't even the case, because most of these are young families who were given everything anyway, so they're just doing it again. We rob in many ways. God says, you rob me when you withhold your tithes and offerings from me. We rob in many ways. I've seen individuals, I've seen men and women rob their children from their child support or rob their family from financial needs because of habits, because of maintaining hobbies or toys or addictions. You see, robbing, stealing from someone attacks trust. It attacks their ability to trust, to have faith or confidence in you. So every time, if it's a father that robs from his kids, it robs those kids of the ability to have faith and trust in a man, in a father, or in any parents. When kids grow up where there's been adultery or divorce, where they rob each other, those kids are robbed the example of a strong marriage. We rob sometimes from, in a sense of robbing them of security and safety, a peace of mind. We rob them of joy. Sometimes we rob with our tongue. Sometimes we rob people with our tongue, where we so belittle them, so judge them, so critical of them, so demeaning of them, that we rob them of their self-worth and their dignity. You see, thieves, there are two types of thieves, in my opinion. Those who all are about self. They're all self-centered. Everything they do, it's all about them. All about them. But then there's the other type of thief that is, they have no self-worth. They have no image of self. They are very low self-esteem. So they steal in order to try and build themselves up. Others rob because they think more of themselves than they ought. Others rob because they think so little of themselves. Christians, as the book says in Ephesians chapter 4, you should steal no longer. This little fox will destroy the vine. Love you, Steers Chapel.